The alert came 3 days later. Federation High Command was sending an inspection team to Kepler 9. This was unusual. The Academy normally received inspections once per year, and the last one had been only 4 months ago. Rumors spread quickly through the station. Some said the Federation was planning to close smaller academies. Others whispered about budget cuts or restructuring. When the inspection team arrived, the rumors stopped. This was not a normal inspection. Admiral Chen Nakamura stepped off the transport first. He was human, one of the highest-ranking officers in the entire Federation fleet. Behind him came Colonel Dren Korthos, a Vaxian security chief known for his rigid views on military discipline. They brought a full staff of analysts and observers. The senior instructors gathered in the main briefing room. Commander Vex stood at attention, proud and confident. He had nothing to fear from any inspection. His record was perfect. The academy ran smoothly under his leadership. Colonel Korthos walked slowly around the room, examining each instructor with cold eyes. When his gaze passed over the human instructors, his lip curled slightly. Vaxians believed humans were soft, weak creatures who had no business in combat roles. Admiral Nakamura stood at the front of the room, his hands clasped behind his back. He thanked the instructors for their service and explained that High Command wanted to evaluate training effectiveness. The best way to do this, he said, was through practical demonstration. Colonel Korthos stepped forward with a smile that showed too many teeth. He suggested a combat simulation, a live exercise where instructors could demonstrate their teaching methods and tactical skills. Commander Vex immediately agreed. This was his chance to shine before High Command. He proposed a complex urban warfare scenario, the kind he excelled at. Colonel Korthos nodded approvingly. Then he added one more detail. To make the exercise more realistic, they should include instructors from all departments, even the support instructors, even the humans. Several instructors laughed at this. Support teachers like Morrison had no place in combat simulations. They taught first aid and survival basics. They were not warriors, Colonel Korthos insisted. He said it would be educational for everyone to see how different skill sets performed under pressure. His tone made it clear he wanted to humiliate the human instructors, to prove they did not belong in a military academy. Admiral Nakamura's expression darkened, but he said nothing. Kyle Morrison sat in the back row, as always. He had been quiet throughout the entire meeting. Now he raised his hand politely. His voice was soft when he spoke. He said he would volunteer to participate in the exercise. He asked only one question. Would the training weapons be set to non-lethal settings? He wanted to make sure no one would be hurt. The room erupted in laughter. Of course the weapons would be non-lethal. This was a simulation, not real combat. Commander Vex assured Morrison that everything would be perfectly safe. He even offered to personally ensure Morrison was not overwhelmed during the exercise. The other instructors grinned. They thought Morrison was afraid. Poor Morrison, worried about getting hurt in a simple training scenario. Morrison nodded and thanked them. He sat back down, his face showing no emotion. Admiral Nakamura watched him carefully. Something passed between them, a look that lasted only a second. Then Nakamura turned back to the group and confirmed the exercise would take place the following day. That night, Nira could not stop thinking about Morrison's question. Why had he asked about weapon settings? Everyone knew simulations use safe training equipment, unless Morrison was not worried about himself, unless he was worried about what he might do to others. She made a decision that would change everything. She broke into the Academy's secured archives. This was a serious offense that could get her expelled or even arrested. But Nira needed to know the truth. She needed to see Morrison's real service record. The security on human military files was stronger than she expected. It took her 3 hours to bypass the encryption. When she finally got through, she found a corrupted file. Much of the data was damaged or missing, but enough remained to paint a picture. Kyle Morrison, age 47, entered military service at age 18, assigned to Special Operations Division after basic training, deployed to hostile environments. Classification level, maximum security. The file listed dozens of missions, but all the details were redacted. Black bars covered names, locations, objectives. Only the results remained visible. Mission successful. Targets eliminated. Assets recovered. Casualties, 0. One section made Nira's blood run cold. It was a psychological evaluation from 20 years ago. The evaluator had written notes in clinical, detached language. Subject demonstrates exceptional tactical ability. Survival instincts beyond normal human parameters. Emotional responses muted in combat situations. Recommendation: continue observation for signs of empathy loss. Another note appeared 5 years later. Subject retired from active operations at own request. Reason given: no longer wishes to kill. Psychological evaluation shows recovered emotional range. Subject suitable for non-combat roles. Recommendation: teaching position approved. Then Nira found what she had been searching for. A mission file labeled Operation Silent Reaper. Most of it was destroyed, but a video file remained intact. Her hand shook as she activated the playback. The video showed a rescue transport landing at a Krill fortress. The footage was from the pilot's camera. They had arrived after the operation was complete. The fortress courtyard was filled with bodies. Krill warriors lay everywhere, their massive forms still unbroken. They had not died in random combat. Someone had killed them with terrible efficiency. Precise shots, perfect placement. Not a single wasted movement or unnecessary death. The camera moved through the carnage toward the fortress entrance. Freed hostages stumbled out, crying and traumatized but alive. All of them. Every single hostage had survived. The camera panned to show a single human soldier sitting on the fortress steps. He was covered in blood, none of it his own. He was cleaning a combat knife with slow, careful movements. The soldier looked up at the camera. He was younger in the video, maybe 27 years old, but Nira recognized him immediately. Kyle Morrison. His face was calm, almost peaceful. He was humming something, a simple tune like a lullaby. Around him lay 400 dead enemies. He sat in the middle of a massacre, humming softly and cleaning his blade. The pilot's voice came through the video. He asked Morrison if he was injured. Morrison looked down at himself, seemed surprised by all the blood, and shook his head. No injuries. He asked if the hostages needed medical attention. His voice was soft and concerned, like a teacher asking about students. The pilot said medical teams were already helping the hostages. Morrison nodded and went back to cleaning his knife. Nira turned off the video. She felt sick. This was the man who taught cadets how to purify water and build shelter. This was the quiet instructor who apologized when he accidentally bumped into people in the hallway. This was Reaper. The ghost. The shadow. The legend that made armies shake with fear. She understood now why he had asked about weapon settings. Tomorrow, Commander Vex and the other instructors would face something they could not comprehend. They thought this was a game, a simple simulation to show off their skills. They had no idea what they had challenged. Nira wanted to warn them. She wanted to tell Vex that he was making a terrible mistake. But who would believe her? She was just a cadet. And they were so confident, so sure of their superiority. They would laugh at her concerns just like they laughed at Morrison's question about weapon settings. She thought about Morrison sitting in that briefing room, listening to them laugh at him. He had not been offended or angry. He had simply accepted their mockery with the same quiet patience he showed everything. Because Morrison knew something, they did not. He knew exactly what he was capable of. He knew that tomorrow, when the simulation began, they would learn the difference between warriors who talked about combat and warriors who lived in its shadows. Nira deleted her access logs and left the archives. She walked back to her quarters slowly, thinking about the man who moved like silence and spoke like a gentle teacher. Tomorrow, the Academy would see the truth. Commander Vex thought himself the greatest warrior. Colonel Korthos wanted to humiliate human instructors. Admiral Nakamura knew better. He had tried to prevent this with his silence and his dark looks. But now it was too late. Tomorrow, Reaper would remind them all why legends are born in blood and shadows. And Kyle Morrison would do it quietly, politely, with that same soft voice and empty smile. Because that was what made him truly terrifying. He did not need to boast or threaten. His actions spoke louder than any words. Nira lay in bed, unable to sleep. In the darkness of her room, she imagined tomorrow's simulation. She saw Commander Vex, so proud and confident. She saw Colonel Korthos, eager to prove human weakness. And she saw Kyle Morrison, quiet and patient, waiting in the shadows. The greatest lesson, she realized, was not taught in classrooms or training grounds. It was taught through experience. Tomorrow, every instructor at Kepler-9 Academy would learn what humanity really meant in the context of war. They would learn it from a teacher who never raised his voice and never wasted a movement. They would learn it from Reaper. The dining hall on Kepler-9 station buzzed with conversation. Officers and instructors filled the long tables, their voices mixing with the sound of plates and glasses. Commander Vex Talaris stood at the head table, his massive frame casting a shadow over his colleagues. He was Zinthari, a warrior species known throughout the galaxy for their strength and combat skills. His dark blue skin bore the scars of 100 battles, each mark a story of victory. Tonight, Vex was in a celebratory mood. He had just completed another perfect month of combat simulations. 15 challenges, 15 victories. No one at the academy could match his tactical mind or his fighting ability. He raised his glass high and the other instructors cheered. They had seen him defeat opponents twice his size. They had watched him outsmart the most cunning strategists. Commander Vex was simply the best. In the corner of the room, far from the celebration, sat Kyle Morrison. He was human, shorter than most species in the Federation, with brown hair going gray at the temples. He wore the simple uniform of a basic instructor. While others talked and laughed, Kyle ate his meal quietly. He cut his food with careful precision, chewed slowly, and said nothing. When other instructors passed his table, they barely noticed him. Kyle Morrison taught wilderness survival and basic first aid. He was the least exciting teacher at the academy. A young Draxian instructor, eager to impress Vex, called out across the room. His voice carried over the noise. He asked Vex to name the greatest warrior he had ever faced in battle. The room grew quieter. Everyone wanted to hear this story. Vex loved to tell stories about his conquests. Vex laughed, a deep booming sound that filled the hall. He said there was no greatest warrior. No one had ever truly challenged him. Every opponent fell before his superior tactics and strength. The other instructors nodded and murmured their agreement. Of course, no one could match Commander Vex. He was legendary. Kyle Morrison continued eating his meal. He showed no interest in the conversation. His face remained calm and empty of expression. If he heard Vex's boasting, he gave no sign. He simply existed in his corner, invisible to the celebration around him. Later that night, in the Academy's main library, Cadet Nira Vel sat surrounded by data screens. She was Sirani, with pale purple skin and large eyes that could see in multiple light spectrums. Nira was the top student in her class, known for her analytical mind and endless curiosity. She never accepted information at face value. She always dug deeper. Tonight, Nira was researching human military history. She had chosen humans for her term project because they were relatively new to the Federation. Only 300 years had passed since first contact. Most species viewed humans as weak and unimpressive. They came from a death world, yes, but so did many species. What made humans special? Nira wanted to understand. She scrolled through public records, finding nothing unusual. Humans served in various Federation roles. They were competent soldiers, but not exceptional. They held mid-level positions in the fleet. Nothing remarkable. Nira frowned. Every species had something that made them unique. What was the human advantage? Then she found something strange, a file buried deep in the military archives. It was heavily encrypted, which immediately caught her attention. Why encrypt old battle reports? Nira was skilled with computers. She had learned from the best programmers in her system. She began working on the encryption carefully, patiently. After 2 hours, the file opened. Most of it was corrupted or redacted. Large sections had been deliberately erased, but fragments remained. Nira read them with growing fascination. The file mentioned something called the Krill incursion. This was 20 years ago before Nira was born. The Krill were a hostile species that had attacked Federation colonies on the Outer Rim. The war was brutal and short. The Federation won, but at great cost. One section of the file made Nira stop breathing. It described a classified operation, a rescue mission behind enemy lines. The Krill had taken hostages, important Federation diplomats and their families. Standard rescue attempts had failed. The Krill fortress was too well defended, so the Federation tried something different. They sent a single operative. The file listed mission results in cold, simple language. One operative deployed, 400 enemy combatants present. Mission duration 6 hours. Result, all hostages recovered alive. Enemy casualties 400. Friendly casualties 0. Nira read the line 3 times. One person, 400 enemies. It seemed impossible. The file gave no name, only a designation. Operation Silent Reaper. The word Reaper was highlighted in red, marked as classified beyond the file's encryption level. She spent the next week asking quiet questions. She talked to older instructors about the Krill War. Most remembered it. The war had been terrifying. The Krill were vicious fighters, 7 feet tall with natural armor and incredible strength. They showed no mercy, but the instructors remembered something else too. They remembered when the Krill suddenly became afraid. A Vaxian combat instructor told Nira about Krill prisoners of war. These massive warriors, who feared nothing, would sometimes wake screaming. They spoke of ghosts in their language, shadows that killed. The Vaxian instructor laughed about it. Superstition, he said. The stress of losing the war had broken their minds. Nira tried to access human military records next. This proved frustrating. Every species in the Federation maintained detailed service records for their military personnel. You could look up any officer and see their career history, their battles, their commendations. Human records were different. Basic information was available, but anything related to special operations was sealed. Completely locked down, no access without the highest security clearance. She looked up Kyle Morrison out of curiosity. He was human after all, and she was researching humans. His file was surprisingly empty. It listed him as an instructor at Kepler 9 Academy. Subject areas, wilderness survival, basic first aid, environmental hazards. Before his teaching position, his record showed nothing. Just a blank space where his service history should be. Nira mentioned this to her friends in the cadet common area. They laughed at her. Morrison was the most boring teacher in the entire academy. He spoke so quietly that students in the back of the class could barely hear him. He never told war stories like the other instructors. He just taught basic skills, simple stuff that everyone already knew. Why would someone like that have a mysterious past? Nira's friends thought she was seeing patterns where none existed, but Nira could not stop thinking about it. The next day she went to observe Morrison's class. She sat in the back, pretending to study while watching him teach. Morrison stood at the front of the outdoor training ground. 20 cadets sat before him, most looking bored. He was teaching them how to find water in different environments. His voice was soft, almost gentle. He spoke slowly, making sure everyone understood. He showed them plants that held moisture. He explained how to read the land for signs of underground water. It was basic information, the kind of thing children learned. The cadets barely paid attention. Nira watched Morrison move between them, correcting techniques with quiet words. Then she noticed something. Morrison never made unnecessary movements. Every step had purpose. Every gesture was precise. When he walked, his feet made no sound on the gravel path. Other instructors stomped and crashed through the training ground. Morrison flowed like water, silent and smooth. She noticed his hands too. They bore scars, thin white lines across the knuckles and palms. These were not the scars of accidents or training injuries. They were the scars of someone who had used their hands as weapons again and again. Morrison caught her staring and smiled politely. His smile did not reach his eyes. Those eyes were empty, calm like still water. They were the eyes of someone who had seen terrible things and learned to feel nothing. That night, Nira could not sleep. She kept thinking about that smile and those empty eyes. She thought about the file, about Operation Silent Reaper, about 400 dead enemies. She thought about Kyle Morrison, the quiet man who taught bored cadets how to find water and treat small wounds. In her gut, Nira knew the truth. She had no proof yet, but she knew. The ghost that haunted Krill nightmares, The shadow that killed 400 warriors. The operative with no service record. It was Kyle Morrison. It had always been Kyle Morrison. He taught survival skills because he was the best survivor. He spoke softly because he had nothing to prove. He moved silently because silence was his weapon. Commander Vex thought himself the greatest warrior in the academy. But the real legend sat in the corner, unnoticed and forgotten, teaching cadets how to stay alive. Nira fell asleep thinking about empty eyes and silent footsteps. In her dreams, shadows moved through fortress halls and warriors fell without making a sound. And in every dream, the shadow wore Kyle Morrison's quiet smile. The simulation arena was massive. It covered 3 levels of the station, designed to replicate a colony under attack. Buildings lined virtual streets. Corridors twisted through residential blocks. There were 100 places to hide and 1,000 ways to die, even in a simulation. The arena could accommodate 50 combatants easily. Today it would host 16. Commander Vex stood in the preparation room checking his weapons. He had chosen 15 of the best instructors and senior cadets for his team. They were all experienced fighters from warrior species, Zentarivaxian Drexian, each one capable of defeating multiple opponents in single combat. Together, they were unstoppable. Vex felt confident. More than confident. He felt certain. The mission parameters were simple. Vex's team had to secure a colony and eliminate any hostile forces. Morrison's role was to play the enemy, a single hostile operator trying to disrupt the mission. He had 30 minutes to survive. If he lasted that long, the simulation would end in a draw. Vex did not expect it to last 10 minutes. In the observation room, dozens of people gathered to watch. Admiral Nakamura sat in the front row, his face unreadable. Colonel Korthos stood beside him, eager and excited. Other instructors filled the remaining seats. Nira managed to slip in at the back. Her heart pounded as she watched the preparation screens. This was really happening. Kyle Morrison entered the arena alone. He wore standard combat gear and carried basic weapons, a rifle, a sidearm, a knife. Nothing special. He moved to his starting position on the 3rd level, far from Vex's team. The arena administrator asked if he was ready. Morrison nodded quietly. He checked his weapons with quick, efficient movements. Then he looked up at the observation camera and smiled that empty smile. The simulation began. Vex immediately deployed his forces in a standard search pattern. 3 teams of 5, each covering a different approach route. They would sweep through the arena systematically, leaving nowhere for Morrison to hide. Radio discipline was perfect. Movement was coordinated. Vex had trained them well. Morrison disappeared. One moment he was visible on the tracking screen. The next, his signal simply vanished into the maze of buildings. Vex frowned but was not concerned. The arena had sensor coverage everywhere. Morrison could not truly hide. The system would show his heat signature, his movement, his breathing. 5 minutes passed. Team 1 reported no contact. Team 2 reported the same. Team 3 moved through the 2nd level, checking every room and corridor. Nothing. Where was Morrison hiding? Vex ordered his teams to tighten their search pattern. Morrison had to be somewhere. Then Team 3's radio went silent. Vex called for a status report. No response. He checked the biosign monitors. All 5 members of Team 3 showed flatlined. Dead in simulation terms, eliminated. Vex felt the first touch of concern. He ordered Team 1 to investigate. They approached Team 3's last known position carefully, weapons ready. They found their teammates on the ground. Each one had been shot once, single rounds to fatal areas. The shots showed perfect accuracy. Whoever killed them knew exactly where to aim for maximum effect. The kills were so clean, so precise that it looked like an execution rather than combat. Team 1 reported their findings. Vex ordered them to hold position and stay alert. Then he called Team 2. No answer. He checked the monitors. Team 2 was gone. All 5 biosigns flatlined, eliminated. 10 fighters down in less than 8 minutes, and Morrison had not made a single sound. In the observation room, silence fell. Colonel Korthos leaned forward, his expression changing from amusement to shock. The other instructors stared at the screens, unable to believe what they were seeing. Nira watched Admiral Nakamura. He showed no surprise. He had known. He had known what Morrison could do. Vex's confidence crumbled into genuine fear. This was not a simulation anymore. This was a nightmare. Morrison was not fighting them. He was hunting them. Every movement showed professional skill beyond anything Vex had encountered. Morrison used the environment perfectly, turning their numbers against them. In the tight corridors, they could not bring their full strength to bear. They were targets, not hunters. Team 1 tried to retreat to a more defensible position. They never made it. Morrison hit them from above, dropping from a ventilation shaft they had not even considered. 3 died in the first second. The remaining 2 turned to fight. They were Vaxian warriors trained from birth for combat. They lasted another 3 seconds. Now only Vex and his personal guard remained. 3 fighters, the best of the best. They barricaded themselves in a central room with multiple exits. They set up overlapping fields of fire. There was no way Morrison could approach without being seen and shot. Vex forced himself to breathe slowly. They just had to survive another 15 minutes. They could do this. The lights went out. Emergency power should have kicked in immediately. It did not. Someone had disabled the backup systems. Vex and his team switched to night vision. They could see the room in shades of green and gray. They aimed at the doorways, ready for any movement. Nothing happened. No footsteps. No sounds of movement. Morrison was somewhere in the darkness, but where? Vex's hands began to shake. He was Commander Vex Talaris, undefeated warrior. He had fought in real wars. He had killed enemies in actual combat. But this was different. Morrison was not an enemy soldier. He was something else entirely. A biosign flatlined. One of Vex's guards dropped without a sound. The other 2 spun around, searching for a target. They saw nothing. Another biosign flatlined. The second guard fell. Vex was alone now, standing in darkness with his weapon raised. His breathing was loud in his ears, too loud. He tried to control it, tried to stay calm. Then he realized his weapon was gone, taken from his hand so smoothly he had not even felt it. Vex looked down in horror. His rifle lay on the ground, disassembled into parts. When had that happened? How had Morrison done that without him noticing? A voice spoke from directly behind him, soft, polite, apologetic, Morrison's voice. He said the simulation was complete and thanked Vex for a good fight. Vex tried to turn around, but he was too slow. His biosign flatlined. He collapsed to the simulation floor, technically dead. The lights came back on. Morrison stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the simulated bodies of Vex's team. He checked his equipment calmly, as if this was just another training exercise. His breathing was normal. He showed no signs of exhaustion or stress. He had eliminated 16 trained fighters in 23 minutes and looked like he had just finished a light walk. The observation room remained silent. No one spoke. No one moved. They had just witnessed something that should not be possible. One human had defeated 16 elite fighters without taking a single hit. Without making a mistake. Without showing any weakness at all. Colonel Korthos stared at the screen, his mouth hanging open. He had wanted to humiliate the human instructors. He had wanted to prove they were weak and worthless. Instead, he had revealed something terrifying. Humans were not weak. They were just very, very good at hiding their strength. Morrison left the arena and walked to the preparation room. The eliminated fighters were coming out as well, looking shaken and confused. Vex sat on a bench with his head in his hands. His undefeated record was shattered. More than that, his confidence was broken. He had truly believed he was the best. Now he knew better. Morrison approached Vex and spoke quietly. He apologized for the aggressive tactics. He said Vex and his team had fought bravely. He offered to run training sessions on counter-infiltration techniques if anyone wanted to learn. His voice was the same as always, soft, gentle, like a patient teacher talking to struggling students. Vex looked up at Morrison. For the first time, he truly saw him, not the boring instructor who taught basic skills, not the quiet human who sat in corners. He saw Reaper, the legend, the ghost who killed 400 Krill warriors and sat humming in the blood. Vex nodded slowly. He understood now. Some warriors talked about their skills. Others simply had them. In the observation room, Admiral Nakamura stood and left without comment. Nira watched him go, then looked back at Morrison on the screen. He was cleaning his weapons with careful attention, checking each part before putting it away. His hands moved with the same precision they showed during combat. Every action deliberate, every movement perfect. The lesson was complete. Commander Vex had asked who the greatest warrior was. Now he knew. The greatest warrior did not boast or brag. He taught survival skills to bored cadets. He spoke softly and moved quietly, and when necessary, he reminded Armies why his name made them shake. His name was Kyle Morrison. His name was Reaper, and he was just getting started. The briefing room was quiet after the simulation. Instructors spoke in low voices, still processing what they had witnessed. Commander Vex sat alone, staring at nothing. His perfect record meant less now. Winning against other instructors seemed meaningless when compared to what Morrison could do. The gap between them was too wide. It was like comparing a practice sword to a real blade. Colonel Cortho stood by the window looking out at the stars. His earlier confidence had vanished. He had spent years believing humans were inferior fighters, weak, unimpressive. The simulation destroyed that belief in 23 minutes. Now he wondered what else he had been wrong about. How many other humans like Morrison existed? How had they hidden this capability for so long? Kyle Morrison stood by the door, speaking quietly with a young instructor who had questions about close-quarters tactics. He answered patiently, using simple language to explain complex movements. He demonstrated a defensive position, moving slowly so the instructor could follow. He was the same teacher he had always been. Nothing about him suggested what he had just done. No pride, no arrogance, just quiet competence. Admiral Nakamura entered the room and requested a private meeting with Morrison. His voice carried authority that made everyone stop talking. Morrison nodded and followed the Admiral out. Nira watched them leave. She wanted to follow but knew better. Then she thought about what she had discovered, about the truth everyone needed to know. She made a decision. Nira slipped out of the briefing room and followed the Admiral and Morrison through the station corridors. She stayed far enough back that they would not notice her. They went to the guest quarters, the private rooms reserved for high-ranking visitors. Nira waited until they entered, then moved closer to the door. She knew this was wrong. Eavesdropping on an admiral was a serious offense, but she had to know. Inside the quarters, Admiral Nakamura poured 2 glasses of whiskey. Real whiskey from Earth, amber and smooth. He handed one to Morrison and gestured to a chair. Morrison sat, holding the glass but not drinking yet. He waited for the Admiral to speak first. Old military habits never died. Nakamura took a sip and sighed. He told Morrison that the demonstration had been excessive. A simple victory would have sufficed. Morrison did not need to dominate so completely. Morrison listened quietly, then responded in his soft voice. He said they needed to understand what humanity brought to the Federation. Not arrogance. Not bravado. Capability. When people underestimated humans, others died. The Admiral studied Morrison's face. He asked about the Krill incursion. That was 20 years ago now. How many operators from the Reaper program were still active? Morrison's expression did not change. He gave the numbers calmly. 17 active operators, 53 retired, 94 dead. They had paid for their reputation in blood and bodies. Outside the door, Nira pressed closer. She had been right. Morrison was part of a program. There were others like him. 17 still serving. The number seemed small until she thought about what one person had done in the simulation. 17 people like Morrison could change the outcome of wars. The Admiral asked another question. Why did they call him Reaper? Where did that name come from? Morrison took a sip of whiskey before answering. His voice remained level, emotionless. He said when he arrived, death followed quietly. No drama, no speeches, just results. The Krill had a saying after human operators started working in their territory. They said humans moved like ghosts and struck like death itself. The Krill word translated to Reaper. The name stuck. Nakamura nodded slowly. He asked the hard question then. Did Morrison regret it? The missions? The killing? All those deaths? Morrison set down his glass. He looked at the Admiral directly. He said he regretted it every day. Every single day. But regret was not the same as being wrong. Those hostages lived because someone was willing to do terrible things. He had volunteered to be that someone. He continued quietly. He said that now he taught others to survive, so maybe they would not need someone like him. Maybe the next generation could solve problems without creating monsters. Maybe they could be better than he was. That was why he taught basic survival skills. Every cadet who learned to stay alive was one less person who needed rescuing. One less mission. One less reason to send Reaper into the darkness. Outside the door, Nira felt tears on her face. She finally understood. Morrison was not proud of what he had done. He carried it like a weight, a burden that never lightened. He taught because teaching was his penance. Every cadet he trained was a small repayment for all the lives he had taken. The Admiral asked if Morrison ever thought about returning to operations. Morrison shook his head. He said he had done enough. He had given enough. Someone else could be the monster now. He just wanted to teach and live quietly. The Admiral accepted this with a nod. He said the Federation was lucky to have Morrison as a teacher. Most people never got to learn from legends. Morrison smiled that empty smile. He said legends were just people who survived situations that killed everyone else. Nothing special. Nothing noble. Just survival and luck and the willingness to do what others would not. The Admiral disagreed. He said it took more than that. It took control. The ability to turn killing on and off like a switch. To be a monster when needed and a man when the fighting stopped. That was rare. That was what made someone like Morrison valuable. They talked for another hour. The Admiral shared news from the fleet. Morrison asked about former teammates. Some had found peace in retirement. Others struggled with their memories. A few had chosen to end their pain permanently. Morrison's face showed sadness at those names. Each loss hurt. Each suicide was another weight on his conscience. Eventually, the conversation ended. The Admiral stood and shook Morrison's hand. He thanked him for the demonstration, even though it had been uncomfortable to watch. Morrison nodded and left the quarters. Nira barely had time to hide in an alcove before he walked past. He moved silently as always. His footsteps made no sound on the metal floor. After Morrison disappeared around a corner, Nira stepped out of her hiding place. She stood in the empty corridor, thinking about everything she had heard. Morrison carried death inside him, controlled and contained. He could release it when necessary and lock it away when the mission ended. That required strength beyond physical ability. It required a kind of mental discipline that most people could never achieve. She thought about the video she had seen. Morrison sitting in blood, humming softly. That image had terrified her. Now she understood it better. The humming was a coping mechanism, a way to stay human while doing inhuman things, a reminder that he was more than just a weapon. He was a person who liked music and quiet moments and teaching young people how to survive. Nira made her way back to the cadet quarters. Her friends were talking excitedly about the simulation. They had all heard about it by now. Morrison had defeated Commander Vex. The story was spreading through the entire station. But they only knew the surface. They knew Morrison won. They did not know the cost of that victory. They did not understand what Morrison had given up to become Reaper. One of her friends asked if Nira had seen the simulation. She nodded. They asked what it was like. Nira thought carefully about her answer. She said it was like watching death itself move through the arena. Precise, efficient, unstoppable. Her friends laughed nervously. They thought she was exaggerating. But Nira knew she was not. If anything, her words understated the truth. That night, Nira could not sleep again. She kept thinking about Morrison's words. He regretted what he had done, but he was not wrong to do it. That paradox lived inside him constantly. The weight of necessary evil. The burden of being the one willing to step into darkness so others could stay in light. She thought about the 94 dead operators. People like Morrison who never made it to retirement. They died in the shadows doing terrible things for good reasons. No parades. No monuments. Just classified files and encrypted records. The Federation owed them everything and remembered them not at all. Nira decided something that night. She would never speak about what she had learned. Not to her friends. Not to anyone. Morrison's past was his own. He had earned his quiet life. He had earned the right to be boring old instructor Morrison who taught basic survival skills. If he wanted to be invisible, she would help him stay that way. But she would also never forget. She would remember that legends walked among them, wearing ordinary faces and speaking soft words. She would remember that humanity had depths the Federation did not understand. And she would remember Kyle Morrison, the teacher who carried death in his pocket and chose every day not to use it. That choice, Nira realized, was what made him truly dangerous. Not his skills. Not his training. His control. The ability to be a monster and choose not to be. That was power. That was what made armies shake at his name. Because Reaper could always come back. anytime, anywhere. And when he did, death followed quietly behind. 3 days after the simulation, Kyle Morrison was teaching a wilderness class in the outer training sections of Kepler-9. 20 cadets sat in a circle while he explained how to recognize edible plants on different world types. His voice was soft and patient. The cadets paid attention this time. Word had spread about the simulation. Even boring survival lessons seemed more important when taught by someone who had defeated Commander Vex. The emergency alarm cut through his lecture. Red lights flashed throughout the station. A recorded voice announced a security breach in the main academy building. All personnel were ordered to shelter in place. Morrison stopped talking immediately. His entire demeanor changed in a heartbeat. The gentle teacher vanished. Something else took his place. He told the cadets to lock themselves in the equipment storage room and stay quiet. His voice was still soft, but it carried absolute authority. The cadets obeyed without question. Morrison moved to the door, listening. He heard weapons fire in the distance. Multiple shots, automatic weapons. This was not a drill. Morrison made his way through the outer corridors toward the main building. He moved fast but silent, checking corners with professional caution. Other instructors were shepherding students to safe rooms. Morrison passed them without stopping. He needed information. He needed to know what was happening. He reached the security center and found Nira there with several other instructors. They were watching the security feeds in horror. Armed figures in combat armor had taken control of the main assembly hall. 200 cadets were trapped inside, along with Admiral Nakamura, Commander Vex, and Colonel Korthos. The attackers had positioned themselves perfectly, with overlapping fields of fire and explosives wired to the hostages. An instructor recognized the armor markings. Skarn remnant. They were survivors of a species the Federation had defeated decades ago. Most Skarn had accepted peace and integration, but some never forgave. Some never forgot. They had been planning this attack for years, waiting for the perfect opportunity. A Federation admiral and dozens of future officers all in one place. Their leader appeared on the communication screen. His name was Rax Vorum, a veteran of the old war. His face was scarred and hard. He made his demands clear. The Federation would broadcast his manifesto across all channels. They would admit their crimes against the Skarn people. They would apologize. Or he would execute one hostage every hour until his demands were met. He gave them 60 minutes. The instructors in the security center argued frantically. They ran scenarios on the tactical computer. Every plan ended in massive casualties. The Skarn had prepared too well. Motion sensors covered all approaches. The explosives would detonate if anyone tried a standard assault. The Federation's rapid response teams were 6 hours away. They did not have 6 hours. They barely had one. Morrison stood quietly in the corner studying the security feeds. His eyes moved from screen to screen, absorbing information. Layout, numbers, weapon positions, hostage locations, explosive placements. He was calculating, planning, preparing. Nira watched him and recognized the look on his face. This was not Instructor Morrison anymore. This was Reaper. Morrison spoke quietly. He said he needed 3 things. First, complete schematics of the ventilation system. Second, total darkness for exactly 90 seconds. Third, someone to deliver a message to Rax Vorum. An older instructor protested immediately. Morrison was just a survival teacher. This situation required tactical specialists. They needed to wait for the response teams. Nira stepped forward. She looked directly at the protesting instructor and spoke clearly. Morrison was the specialist. He was the professional. They should give him what he needed. The other instructors stared at her in confusion. How would a cadet know that? Nira did not explain. She just waited. Morrison gave her a slight nod of acknowledgement. The other instructors saw that nod and understood something had passed between them. They pulled up the ventilation schematics. Morrison studied them for 30 seconds, then pointed to 3 entry points. He explained what he needed, speaking in the calm tone of someone describing a simple repair job rather than a rescue operation. One instructor asked what message they should send to Vorum. Morrison thought for a moment. Then he smiled that empty smile. He said to tell Vorum that someone was coming for him. Someone named Reaper. The instructor looked confused. Morrison did not explain. He just gathered basic equipment and headed for the ventilation access. Nira sent the message through the communication system. It appeared on Vorum's screen in the assembly hall. He read it and laughed. His warriors laughed with him. Reaper. They had heard stories about human special operators, propaganda, psychological warfare. Humans trying to seem more dangerous than they were. Vorum had 30 armed fighters and 200 hostages. One human could not change this situation. It was mathematically impossible. Morrison entered the ventilation system and disappeared from the security cameras. The instructors in the security center watched the assembly hall feeds, waiting. 55 minutes remained before the first execution. They counted down silently, praying that Morrison knew what he was doing. At exactly 90 seconds before the execution deadline, the lights in the assembly hall went out. Backup power failed simultaneously. Motion sensors went dark. Communication systems died. Everything that ran on station power simply stopped working. Morrison had done something to the electrical grid. The hall plunged into absolute darkness. The security cameras could not see what happened next. They only recorded audio, and the audio was terrifying. Brief sounds, weapons hitting the floor, bodies collapsing, quiet gasps of surprise cut short, movement so silent it barely registered on the microphones, and underneath it all the sound of controlled breathing, someone moving through the darkness with perfect confidence. The instructors in the security center listened in stunned silence. They heard 30 warriors die in 90 seconds, not killed in a wild firefight, eliminated systematically one after another, with mechanical efficiency. This was not combat. This was execution, professional, clean, unstoppable. The lights came back on. The security cameras showed the assembly hall. Skarn warriors lay scattered across the floor, unconscious or dead. The hostages sat frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. In the center of it all stood Rax Vorum alone. His weapon was gone. His warriors were defeated. And 5 feet in front of him stood Kyle Morrison. Morrison held a combat knife in one hand. His face showed no anger, no excitement, no emotion at all, just that same empty calm he always carried. He spoke to Vorum in a soft voice that the security cameras barely picked up. He said the manifesto would not air. The cause died with the war. These cadets would live because Morrison chose mercy today. Vorum should drop his weapon. Vorum stared at Morrison. He had heard stories about the Reaper program during the war. His commanders said those stories were just propaganda, designed to demoralize Skarn troops. But looking at Morrison now, standing calmly among 30 defeated warriors, Vorum understood the truth. The stories were not propaganda. They were warnings. Vorum looked into Morrison's eyes. He saw nothing there. No hatred, no satisfaction. Just empty certainty. Morrison would kill him if necessary, without hesitation or regret. It would mean nothing. Just another task completed, another problem solved. Vorum had killed many people in his life, but he had never met someone who killed like this. Like breathing, like existing. Vorum dropped his weapon. The Federation response teams arrived 3 hours later. They found the situation resolved. The Skarn remnant members were secured. The hostages were safe. Admiral Nakamura debriefed Morrison personally in a private room. The official report credited a coordinated security response from Academy personnel. Morrison's name appeared nowhere in the documentation. He requested it that way. The Admiral agreed. The next day, Commander Vex found Morrison in the training grounds. He approached slowly, respectfully. He asked why Morrison had become a teacher. Why leave operations when he was clearly so skilled? Morrison watched a group of cadets practice basic first aid techniques before answering. He said he had seen what happened when good people were unprepared for evil. He taught so others could survive. So maybe one day the galaxy would not need people like him. Until then, he would speak softly and move quietly. But when darkness came, when innocent people needed protection, Reaper would answer. Always. Vex nodded. He understood now. Morrison was not hiding from his past. He was trying to create a better future. Every cadet he trained was one less victim. Every skill he taught was one more person who might survive when things went wrong. It was redemption through teaching. It was penance through service. Nira watched Morrison return to his class. The cadets greeted him warmly now. They paid attention to his lessons. They respected him. But they still saw only the surface. They saw Instructor Morrison, patient and kind. They did not see Reaper, the shadow who moved through darkness and left only silence behind. She thought that was better. Let them see the teacher. Let them learn survival and safety and all the basic skills Morrison taught. If they ever needed to see Reaper, it meant something had gone terribly wrong. And on that day, when darkness came calling, they would understand why his name made armies shake.